Yo, welcome back to another tutorial, guys, and this time we're trying to achieve a really cinematic look. So we've got to roll off those highlights and whites and those blacks and shadows to get that fade for that cinematic look. Got to drop that vibrance also, and yeah, I'll show you his Instagram. So I'll be putting everything down in the description for you guys. Go give him a follow down there. I've actually done quite a few tutorials on his style, and he makes really good use of filters to create dramatic lighting in his images, and you can tell the clarity has been dropped in a few of his shots. And yeah, if we come down, I'll just show you the one we're going to be working with, this one right here. So recreating this edit here, and I've actually got the settings for it. Okay, so he's taking this image at 16mm. Usually you wouldn't do that for portraits, but in this case he's gone for a really dramatic look. So stretching it out creates that real dramatic look. ISO 250. Yeah, no need for a higher ISO if he's got enough light. Aperture 2.8, so trying to get more light in, so then he's able to keep his ISO down, little bit of a depth of field at 2.8, and then just shutter speed at 1/160. So got to keep it up pretty much over 100 if you want to get those sharp images. And yeah, I'll also flash up on screen the equipment he's using, and yeah, his camera and lens. But if we go back to his Instagram, just keep looking at a bit of his work. I really like this style, super cinematic. And then if I just come back up, if you click this link here, it's a link to a video he must have made for a travel company. Really dope video, go check it out if you're into a cinematic film or something like that. Here's the raw unedited one that he has sent me, and then we've got a screenshot from Instagram of the edited one. So first thing we'll do, let's drop some vibrance, and let's say drop some contrast, drop some exposure, and get rid of a bit more contrast by doing that. And I'm doing this because I know I'm gonna do a lot of curves down here in the red, green and blue channel and the RGB, because that's what would be in my preset. So usually I would apply a preset first that would do all the curves, and I wouldn't really have to worry about that in terms of exposure. I just would leave the red, green and blue channels how they are. But we're starting from scratch so you guys can see everything. So I've just done this really roughly, get rid of some contrast and some saturation, because when I do these curves, that's going to add in a lot of saturation and a lot of contrast. So it just looks, it will make sense when I do these curves for you guys now. Otherwise it'll just be way too contrasted and way too saturated. So I'll do the red, green and blue channels now, and I'll tell you guys why I did what I did. And usually, remember, these are just in my presets, and then I wouldn't have to worry about changing them so much. But we're trying to teach you guys, so showing you right from scratch. And let's get into it. Okay, so that's the curves done, and if I just turn them off and on, off and on, and you can see how much contrast that has added into the image. I might just tweak a few exposures up here, and then I'll go and explain what I did in the curves. Might just bring up the shadows a bit more, just to expose it a bit, bring down the blacks. Okay. Whites, and then I think we're getting pretty close to our exposure there. Contrast. Bit too underexposed, and yeah, I think that's looking really good. So let's go back to the curves. I lifted this point because if you look hard into the black areas, you can see there's a bit of a lift to the blacks, and it's not very gradual, and that's why I brought this point across, and that just creates more of it in that area. It's hard to explain, but I feel like that black point has been brought up quite a bit. So if I actually get rid of this curve, you can see that black point sort of disappears. This is what happens. You get really harsh, dark blacks, lifting it up this way, really soft, faded black. So if we just keep a bit of contrast, you can see now these blacks aren't as harsh, and there's starting to be a fade. That's a fade in the blacks. So that's an over exaggerated example, but that's what I have seen in the image. And then we go back to what we have, just that little bit in there. And then these are just anchor points. So this is controlling, you want to keep those shadows there. So that's controlling that. And yeah, I've brought up the shadows up here because this reveals a lot of detail in the shadows. And then this will actually just keep those shadows there. You don't want to, if we didn't bring up the shadows up here, we couldn't bring this down, and then couldn't anchor our blacks there. So this point just in the middle, just anchoring the highlights where they should be, and then this point is for that fade to the whites. So as you can see what that's doing, and that just, it gives a bit more of a cinematic look. So a roll off to the blacks and a roll off to the whites, it helps create that flatness and cinematic look. He's got a very cinematic style. And yeah, let's move on. So hopefully you guys can see that that fade back there. It's kind of hard to see, but that's what I've been looking at. And then we've got the red, green and blue channels. So all that I've done is an S curve and then a bit extra in the highlights, midtones, and then you drop the shadows. And I do it a few different ways. So sometimes it's just a real simple S curve, sometimes it's a bit more in the midtones, sometimes it's a bit more in the highlights. Either way, you just want to keep it very similar for each of these. Yeah, and then as you can see before and after, there shouldn't be, unless you're trying to, there shouldn't be a color shift. It should just be more contrast and fade. There shouldn't be a color shift. And color shift I mean by, say if you didn't do it quite correctly, there would be, say, too much blue in the midtones, or go back, or too much blue in the highlights. It should look pretty much the same as before in terms of color. It just needs to be more saturated, more contrast, and a change in fade. Okay, so yeah, just match them up, and then if we keep going back, this is the curves. So if we get flatten that one, here's before and after of just those red, green and blue channels. So let's go back. Okay, so that's the curves done. So we'll move on from that. Clarity, we want to drop it down when we just want that nice smooth look. He does this across many of his images. And yeah, we're looking pretty good here. Let's go up to, let's start getting the tones. So let's just drop the saturation of a lot of these things. So let's drop. Okay, as you can see, we've got this like quite desaturated look. We're too desaturated at the moment, but I plan on bringing in some more colors. That was just to do it real quick. So temperature, I want to really warm this up. You can see there's warm tones right throughout it. So this is a very blue shirt. If we look at the start, and it's almost gone a warm color. So that's how much warmth he's had added into the image. And you could do this with all split toning, or you could do it with temperature. So warm it up, that's plenty. And then if we come down, let's add in a lot of blues into the image. As you can see, we're really warm now. If we just go for a nice blue, with like almost a green as well, so I might make it a dark blue because that will white balance the green tinge the best. And then for the highlights, let's do some yellows or oranges, and then we'll balance this out. So I'll just put a bit in there now. So you might be thinking, why did I do that? That's so much warmth now. That's because I'm gonna shift this right across, and that's gonna introduce a lot more blues into the image. Because this way is all highlights, this way is all blues. And you might be wondering, why did I even do this in the highlights when I could just do it up here? That's because I want to be able to play around with the balance. I want to be able to some more, some less, and if I didn't put that in there, I wouldn't be able to do that. Alright, let's keep going. Let's do some RGB. So let's get rid of these greens. As you can see, they're very saturated in our image. Let's drop these yellows a bit more maybe. Blues can maybe hang in there a bit more. You can see over here we've still got a little bit of blues in the image. Right, let's get the right tone to our sand. So it's like quite red at the moment. So that's probably the yellows. Not too much of it is the yellows, but the yellows could be. So looking at this sort of area, because we can see it's shifting on our image and his shirt quite a bit. So our shirt looks quite green at the moment. Our yellows are affecting it. We want it less green. That means we're going to come this way. And I think that gets us a much closer tone to what he has. I didn't mean to shift the greens then. But the greens, so that's on his head there. We'll play around with this. I think further to the right looks much more like the tone he has. Okay, back here it must be the oranges that is really affecting the sand. Yep. And as you can see, we're just too red. Let's go for more of a yellow. Reds. Okay, you can see where that's affecting. Let's line that up. I think it could be a little more orange, so especially in here. It's pretty close. Might have to come back to it. Might come back to that one. Saturation, we'll just increase them, then it might be easier to see. Yeah, I think they look a little too red. Let's go a bit more orange. Okay. Okay, we'll look at the aquas and the blues. So playing around, not much, can just stay in the middle there. These blues, can't see much of them at all. Let's just keep them in the middle. Let's just maybe a touch of teal. Purples, not a lot, just leave them about in the middle. Magenta in the middle there. Doesn't really matter. Alright, let's work with some saturations down here. Let's touch them up a bit better. So these oranges over to the right, a bit too saturated. Let's drop them down. Yellows, want to faintly see them. Greens can stay all the way down. As you you can see, that's what that's affecting. Aquas, not much in there. Purple, blues, just bring them down semi in line with everything else. Just in case it was in the image, I would probably do something like that. Same with the purples, in line. Luminance, I think I could bring up the greens. That might give a bit of a shine to a very important part of the image, sort of makes it pop. I think we just need a bit more saturation to the entire image. Maybe let's just bump up maybe to about there. I think that's looking pretty close. Right, let's do some dodging and burning. So he told me he did some dodging and burning in Photoshop, but I think I'll just try to do it in Lightroom here. So dodging and burning is just brightening the brighter areas and darkening the darker areas, but you're selecting those areas. You're not just bringing up the contrast slider, you're brushing where you want that effect. So I have selected, I've already brushed, and I just brushed over everywhere where the light is hitting. So I didn't worry about areas out to the side. I just wanted to add dodging and burning or contrast to the main area of our subject or image, and that's this area. So brushed over the brighter areas, and what I wanted to do, I didn't want to bring up exposure because that would bring up our blacks and shadows as well. So I just wanted to bring up the whites and the highlights. Okay, and then so if I just show you, so let's delete it, so hopefully, and then this is with it, you can see the change, and then we want to do the same with the shadows. So I've got another brush here. If I just show you, just brushed over the dark areas that I want more contrast in, and then I just want to I'll drop the exposure for this one, or you could just drop the blacks and shadows, but I'll just go with that. If I just come back up, I think the image could do with more contrast in the shadows. I think I might have moved this and then moved it away again. So as you can see, that's quite important for getting that rich contrast. Let's bring this point down even more. Okay, and then that's kind of, because we added in more saturation into the dark shadows there, sort of added in more saturation, so I might take out the saturation we just did then. And yeah, the dodging and burning could be done a bit more, but I think I might just leave it there, guys. So in terms of sharpening, maybe a touch. This looks a little more, I don't think we need any grain. It just looks a touch grainy because it's a screenshot off Instagram. But I think we are good, guys. I might just leave it there. Let me know what you thought down in the description, guys. And I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.